Hey, and welcome back. So we just wrapped up the section on epic stories versus individual stories and finding the right level of abstraction for each one. And so we touched on acceptance criteria quite a bit, but I really want to break down what acceptance criteria is, how to approach it, and then how I actually wrote out an example from the mockups that I built. So acceptance criteria is really a collaboration. Okay, and it's a collaboration between you as the product manager, the developer or developers who are going to be working on this. If there's a development lead working with other developers, you can work with the development lead, your designer, as well as any QA person that you might work with or that's on your team. Okay, because AC, the acceptance criteria, is going to call out everything from back end development, things that need to be done, check boxes that can be checked off, front end development. It's going to include specific design criteria, and it's really for QA to go in and make sure that once it's developed and implemented in the product, that before it goes out to the market, they can go through and test all of these items and make sure that what this acceptance criteria is a part of that story is all consistent with what's in the code based on what they're testing. Okay, so that's the purpose of acceptance criteria. And it's really a collaboration because as a product manager, you may not have a technical background enough to know what all needs to happen on the back end. Okay, so you might be more familiar with what needs to happen on the front end, what the users visually see and interact with, but there may be database changes or API changes or different things that are happening behind the scenes that you're not fully aware of. Okay. As you work more with the team and understand the guts of your product, you may learn some of those things and be able to anticipate some of those things. But early on, you'll especially have to rely on your developers, and you should always rely on your developers to help craft what the technical acceptance criteria should be. Okay. So breaking this down, let's go back to our example here, right? So we have the alert in the notifications icon, and we have the actual notification with the button that they can click if they're interested in advanced animations. Okay, so this is one story, and this is how it breaks down. So as a free Figma user, I should see a notification in my projects page. I put projections for some reason. So in my projects page, so I can see the notification of advanced animations coming and click the interested button if I would benefit from having them. Okay, so that's an example of the way I could write that story. Um, Again, the purpose isn't to write perfect stories, it's so that way people understand what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. And the acceptance criteria, so it gets really detailed, but it's important to be detailed. So once this releases, the next time the free user logs in and goes to the projects page, they should see the notification icon lit up red. Okay, and that's where the hex code for the color red, if you're using hex code numbers in your CSS, would be inserted, so that way the developer could make sure that or your front-end developer can make sure that that's what is being used, that it's consistent, and then you can test against that in QA. The icon should remain red regardless of how many times the user comes to this page until the icon is clicked. Okay, when the user clicks on the red icon, then the icon should turn back to its normal state, which insert the hex code. It's probably just regular black. But keeping on going with this, when the user clicks on the red alert icon, the top notification should say advanced animations are coming as shown in the design, and that's where you would insert that's where you could insert the Figma prototype link or a screenshot or whatever works to visually represent what you're trying to do. Having the actual prototype link, whether using Figma or a competitive tool, is that you can actually see the specific hex code numbers, or you can actually see the font being used, like in this example using like Roboto light or Roboto regular, and the font size, that kind of stuff. All right, and then there should also be a black, insert the type of black you're using. If it's, you should just insert the type of hex number regardless, button with white text that says interested in all caps. So it may seem obvious because it's in your design that they should be able to see the design and just do what the design looks like. But in some cases, like the mockups may be different than what's standard in code today. So if I as a designer, and just speaking on behalf of a designer, ended up using some other font style other than Roboto, and everywhere else it's Roboto in the product, but the developer was only looking at what's in your design tool. And if the expectation was that they look to the design tool to figure out what the criteria is, then if anything changes in the design, let's say you have a new designer who didn't know to change their font to Roboto, and the developer is looking at what's in the design tool, then you could have some inconsistent font or stylings in your product, which isn't good. Okay, so that's why we get very specific. All right, but the purpose of this experiment is to collect data. So you should be asking, why don't we have anything about data collection or data capture in here? And that would be a very wise question to ask, but it's on another slide. Okay, so you don't have to segment it out as data collection acceptance criteria. You could just add it into your acceptance criteria list in whatever tool you're using, whether it's Jira or Trello or a spreadsheet or whatever you're using to write these stories. I just broke it out here for the sake of this lesson to segment it out, and I was running out of room on the other slide. So the specific data collection acceptance criteria that I'm going to call out is when a user visits the project page with the red notification icon, we should record a page visit event with their unique user ID tag. Okay, so if they're in a design, there's a back to projects button that they could click to get them back there. But regardless of the path there, we should be collecting events when someone lands on that page. And just like in a marketing world, we want to measure page visits so we know what the total traffic is as compared to who actually clicks on the icon as opposed to who actually clicks that they're interested, right? So we can build some percentages and get an idea of demand because, realistically, let's say you have 1,000 users on the free product, and just as a hypothetical number, and only 500 people visit in the experimentation window, right? Then you might have to extrapolate some of your data to be more representative of the whole. Okay, so I'm not saying that you have to do that or that would be a good thing to do, but it's just something to keep in mind based on the parameters of your experiment. You want to get an idea of reach and impact, right? And if there's some anomaly where a very small representation of the total free user base is logging in during this experimentation window, then your data will be very much misrepresented. Okay, so you have to just think about certain scenarios when you're collecting data and kind of guard against negative scenarios that could negatively influence the outcomes of your experiment. All right, so with that said, there's 3 things we want to capture: page visits, the number of clicks on the red icon, people who click the alert to see what it is, and then the number of people who click they're interested. All right, and then the way that we're going to use this data is to try to figure out, or help us figure out, what actual demand might be, along with some of the other qualitative and quantitative aspects that we're looking at. Okay, and so there's different tools that people use for data collection, Amplitude, Mixpanel, and there's multiple other tools out there. And regardless of which tool you're using, you just want to make sure that you're collecting the right data to answer the questions that you have going into that experiment, or even if it's not an experiment and it's actually in the product, something that's shipping to market as a live feature that should be fully functional based on the research and prioritization and acceptance criteria you've built. You still want to measure things like usage and adoption and things like that. So, if there's any questions around whether or not you're doing the right thing, you should always be measuring different aspects of usage or what have you in that product for that feature to try to answer questions or challenge assumptions you might have had coming in. Okay, so I put a better description down here. We want to know how many people came to this page after we launched the feature, what percentage of page visitors clicked on the notification icon, and what percentage expressed interest, so we can get a better understanding of potential demand we would have for this feature. And that's the point, and that's why we would build that other feature too. That's outside of this page here. So we have two different touch points of potential demand expression, or ways to gauge interest. So in setting up your experiment, it's important to figure out where those different points of intersection happen, where demand could be expressed or interest could be expressed, and then be able to build an experiment to really push on those different intersection points, or however you want to phrase it. But that's really acceptance criteria in a nutshell, is really just getting really specific about not just what you want to do and why, but the how, right? And the reason why it's a collaboration is because now we're in the how of how it's done, right? You could come into that meeting with your developers, designers, and QA with some examples of how, but part of the negotiable aspect of a story comes into this acceptance criteria. There may be better ways to actually implement it. There may be better hows, right? And so you leave that up to the experts, the designer, the developer, and then once everyone has agreement and QA understands what's agreed upon and what's actually going to be tested, then they have something that they feel comfortable with when they're going through the test, when you're in your development environment. So that way they can sign off on the product in the way that it's supposed to work, that everyone's agreed upon before it goes to market, right? So this whole process has been to understand how to add value and create value, capture value, and then make sure that based on the problems we've identified, we're solving the right problem in the right way, and that we're building for the right problem, as defined by the product manager, you, and that what's going to market is fully tested against the specific criteria that we have for what we've defined as a feature or product that should be successful once it goes into the market. Okay, so I know that's a mouthful, but kind of going back to the beginning of where we started in setting our goals and doing our user research all the way down to now, this is kind of the last step in your process as far as product development goes, but it's not the last step in the process, because there's more to a company than product managers, developers, designers, and QA. There's sales and marketing and support and many other aspects of your business, finance, that are going to have to be involved in product launches. Not every feature launch, but if it's big enough, or if for any reason other departments need to be involved because it's going to impact them, then we have to plan for that. So in the next section, we're going to start talking about go-to-market planning for pre-launch planning. And then after we finish that, we'll wrap up this whole course with post-launch planning. And with that said, I will see you in go-to-market planning for pre-launch.